Here, I guess, is the ultimate question. Is PIMCO better off or worse off without Bill Gross?
Some might think that that's an open question, but the main thing in our minds is most of the team that backed him and contributed to his success over the long term is still in place. The firm and its main strategies are still run by very seasoned portfolio managers with accomplished track records in their own right, and each one remains backed by a very, very deep team of research resources.
So why is it that it seems investors are so spooked? Is it this cult of personality? They simply follow Bill Gross because of his long, long track record?
Part of the reason investors are spooked is because the headlines have been spooky. Obviously, there's been much turmoil over the past year at PIMCO, but arguably one of the bigger sources of that uncertainty or of that turmoil, if you will, has left the building.
But
so in our view, we're actually...
But shouldn't pensions, real investors, actually know PIMCO and the way they invest and who's investing more than simply a Bloomberg headline or two?
Yeah, that's true. And the feedback that we've started to get from the institutional community is actually some votes of support for PIMCO. Essentially, any big gatekeeper is going to be taking a very close look at the management team stepping in behind Bill. And so far, at least in our view, those teams have remained stable.
Michael, that raises a question about the role of pension consultants. Many of these consultants help pension funds decide where to allocate investments, with which firm into what funds. Here, for example, is an excerpt of a note sent out by Wilshire Consulting, one of the biggest consultants to pension funds, on Friday. Mr. Gross's departure is clearly negative and potentially destabilizing to PIMCO's investment and management teams, to the point where meaningful downgrades to our evaluations are expected across certain strategy platforms. Can you blame pension funds for being anxious about the impact of Bill Gross's departure if consultants like Wilshire are putting out notices like that?
Well, clearly that's one organization with one opinion. Each such organization is going to come to its own opinion, hopefully based on thorough analysis of the management teams that remain in place.
Could management or portfolio management get a little out of control right now? One could guess if you were a PM at PIMCO and had some more aggressive or losing trades, right now would be the perfect time to dump them and take your losses, because you sort of have a free pass. Well, not my fault. It's this Bill Gross headline.
That's not our impression of how the current portfolio management team behind Total Return and the other funds are reacting to this development at all.
Michael, I have seen estimates anywhere from 15% to 30% of the value or of the amount of assets, the dollar value of assets that are going to flow out of PIMCO because of Bill Gross's departure. Have you done any work on your own to come up with an estimate of what the impact's likely to be in dollar terms?
Well, what we've seen over the past year in terms of outflows from the funds definitely falls within that range that you mentioned. It's tough to handicap what the future outflows may be. About 60% of the fund is held by individual investors, another, call it 15%, held by DC plans, and call it 10 to 15% held by true institutional investors like the pension funds and the endowments that you mentioned. So in terms of handicapping the future outflows from here, folks that essentially took their money out over the past year because they disagreed either with Gross or didn't like the turmoil at PIMCO, two of those reasons for taking money out of the fund are now resolved.
Well, should that be a reason we should see inflows? If Bill Gross, who has been, you know, a negative spot, who's causing a lot of angst within the company, now that he's out of the building, could this be a reason why the existing PMs and management are going to flourish, so you should give them money?
That's a great open question to raise at this point. You know, we would not be surprised to see additional outflows from PIMCO'S funds just based on from investors who are just tired of the drama there. But the flip side of that is if PIMCO has become a more stable investment organization going forward, that may indeed attract people attracted by the firm's still deep resources and the investment process that by and large remains intact, even though Bill Gross has left it.
Michael, all the attention right now is on Bill Gross, of course, but is it possible that there are other institutional troubles, problems, issues at PIMCO that people might want to be mindful of? I'm thinking, for example, about the SEC investigation into pricing at the Total Return ETF, which was managed by Bill Gross. I don't know, though, how much of a hand he had in the pricing of the underlying securities.
It's certainly possible. Our understanding is that his departure was not related to the SEC probe. The one thing I'd mention about the SEC probe, too, is PIMCO is not the first firm that the SEC has approached about bond pricing issues, nor will it be the last. That might be cause for another discussion, but from our perspective, that's more of a bond pricing and bond market issue than a PIMCO-specific issue at this point.
Michael, you know, there's still a lot of dust in the air. How long do you think it's going to take before it settles? And we do know what the true impact of Gross's departure on PIMCO is, and also where the money goes instead. Is it going to go to BlackRock? Is it going to go to AllianceBernstein? Is it going to go, to JPMorgan Asset Management?
Janus, perhaps?
You know, it's certainly something that we'll be watching, and clearly the spotlight is on PIMCO to deliver. You know, the couple things that we would mention at this point is one mollifying factor here is Gross did not leave with a team behind him. He did not lift out a team. That's different from a couple other situations we've seen like this in recent years. Our understanding is the operation that he's setting up at Janus is somewhat skeletal in nature. Obviously, we'll be watching for personnel departures. We'll be watching the flow situation very closely. In terms of where money from PIMCO might be going, there's no shortage of very proven fixed income managers with very stable investment organizations that could stand to benefit from this. So we will indeed be watching that as well.
Then do you think the street is overstating the situation that's happening at PIMCO right now? For example, Bill Gross was the biggest seller of protection in the market. He was long European banks. He was long insurers. Do you think it's the street trying to push so hard against his trades and make something out of nothing if all the PMs are still there?
Hard to say. I mean, hey, look, this stuff makes great headlines, but when you sift through it and try and parse what the real investment ramifications will be, everybody has always taken pot shots at PIMCO, and this is just the nature of the markets. People react to instability. People react to big sellers. So it would not be surprising if those kinds of things were going on within other trading desks at this point.
Michael, before we let you run, is there anyone in particular whom you think is a flight risk who might follow Bill Gross out the door?
Not at the moment. In fact, most of the people that we would be very concerned about leaving were actually the folks named as CIOs of the firm. So at least from that vantage point, those are the first people we'll be watching. But we've got a very good sense of who are the key players on each of the sector teams of PIMCO, and we'll be watching to see whether they stay or go. Thus far, everybody has stayed.